Out of all the new horror movies I saw in 2021, Malignant was my personal favorite. James Wan has been one of the top tier horror visionaries the past couple decades, so I knew I was in for a wild ride when he announced his return to horror. I mean, come on, Wan inadvertently kicked off the torture subgenre with Saw, created the insanely popular Insidious series, and sparked the entire Conjuring universe. You would be really hard pressed to find anyone else who had such a lasting impact on the genre the past 20 years. That being said, Malignant was a movie that really divided the horror community. Some were calling it an absolute masterpiece, while others were calling it James Wan's worst film to date. I definitely fall higher on that scale, as I think Malignant is everything that the genre has been lacking recently. It is a fun love letter to horror cinema that does not let off the throttle once it gets rolling, even when things don't always add up. Let's take a look at it. My favorite part about Malignant is it's a horror film that plays a lot with genre tropes to set up our expectations for how the movie is going to play out, but then quickly switches. The opening scene to this film is very cheesy. The characters don't fully seem like real people, the line delivery is sort of awkward, and the last line of the scene being,
"It's time. We cut out the cancer,"
is just the right level of corny. This tone carries into the opening credits with loud music blaring over quick shots of surgery and gore. This really felt like an early 2000s gritty slasher movie to me, along the lines of Wrong Turn, House of Wax, or possibly Saw. Then we are introduced to our main character Madison and her shitty husband Derek. Quickly, we learn Derek abuses Madison and belittles her for the multiple miscarriages she has had throughout the relationship. He shoves Madison into a wall, leaves the room, and gets locked out of their bedroom. He ends up sleeping on the couch and wakes up to random electronics going crazy throughout the house and sees the indent of someone sitting on the couch before he is murdered by a ghostly figure. I felt all of this really called back to the late 2000s supernatural movies like Paranormal Activity and possibly the whole Conjuring universe. Madison also ends up getting attacked by the Force and wakes up in the hospital where her sister informs her she had another miscarriage due to the injury she sustained. This is the biggest mention of trauma in this movie, but I feel the idea of trauma is sprinkled throughout the entire runtime, which, as we all know, is the biggest trend in horror cinema right now, popularized mostly by A24 films like Midsommar and Hereditary. At this point in the film, I was honestly still lost at what the true tone of this movie was supposed to be. This isn't even an hour into the movie, and the film has thrown us around like a roller coaster. I didn't know what to expect, but here's where the movie calms down for a bit and turns into a slasher cop drama where we follow all of the characters' journeys of trying to figure out who or what the killer is. James Wan said in an interview with Bloody Disgusting that Malignant is his take on a giallo film. Even though I am far from an expert on that subgenre, from here on out the film does carry heavy giallo tones with its gore, investigation elements, and super loud score. I like to think the whole ending sequence of this film that takes place in the police station is more of a homage to slasher films as a whole, with its high body count and super fun kills, but it's something that can still fall under the giallo umbrella as well. Nonetheless, this film plays with the horror tone so well, it borders between parody and respect, which I feel is super hard to do, but riding that line just ends up making the movie so much fun. It is the highlight of the film, and I still enjoy it on a rewatch. I also think this is where a lot of the middling and negative critic reviews come in for this movie, because if you aren't in tune with horror as a whole, this movie can definitely feel awkward and misguided. The other thing that made me fall in love with this movie is the twist. I personally didn't predict it, but I was thinking it was something along the lines of what we got. I mean, I really can't be that surprised when the opening scene ends with,
"It's time. We cut out the cancer."
but I was not expecting a shriveled up demon with arms spurting out of Madison's back. We are given enough information to think there could be a conjoined twin of some sort, but I was also thinking it may be some tumor giving Madison powers and visions that caused her to act out against her former doctors. With how many paranormal and subdued horror movies that have come out over the past decade, I was really expecting the film to follow something close to that narrative, and it really feels like James Wan was leading into our expectations with that. But what we got was just so much fun, even if you predicted what was coming. That gritty VHS video of Gabriel on the back of Madison's body, followed up with the surgery scene, got me so pumped for what was about to be thrown down in that jail cell. The pacing from the big reveal that transitions right into Gabriel's takeover doesn't allow a lot of time for us to reflect on what just happened. It goes from boom, plot twist, right into boom, the biggest bloodbath of the movie. Breakneck pacing such as this is an element I love in horror movies, as it keeps our adrenaline going, and by the time it's over, my brain can barely keep up. I'm trying to process a woman being controlled in reverse by a parasitic twin who punches right through people's chests with zero hesitation. It is just pure, horrific, cinematic fun that I don't feel too often with recent horror releases. With all of my love for the movie out of the way, I must admit I cannot fault you if you do not care for the film due to its sometimes questionable choices. The biggest one for me is definitely how Derek sees an indentation of a figure sitting on the couch, then standing up. Of course, all the electronics can be pointed to Gabriel's powers that are established in the opening scenes, but it is never once proven he can make people outside of Madison have visions. Even if we are expected to believe we are seeing all of this through Madison's perspective, Gabriel never presents himself as a ghost, nor should he since he isn't one. So this whole element just seems like it is presenting false information to us. Another odd choice was Gabriel's hideout in the attic. The industrial-sized fan is clearly something nobody would ever have in a 2-story Victorian-style townhouse because it just doesn't make sense. I'm not sure why this was chosen to be as the set. It does divert us from thinking the hideout could be in the home, but it's just a bit overdone. I thought it could possibly be a reference to some older film, but I was unable to connect it with anything. The only thing it seems to do is set up the expectation that this location is somewhere else to make Madison's mom crashing through the ceiling to be all that more shocking. It also gives the cops a reason to blame all of the murders on Madison. I will admit, the insanely large fan paired with someone randomly falling 2 stories through a ceiling made for probably the funniest scene in the movie. Whether that was intentional or not, we may never know. The final odd thing I wanted to point out is when the cops need to age up the photo of Madison they find in the doctor's case file back when she was at the research hospital. The detective that takes the photo and re-ages it basically prints off a photo that looks exactly like Madison. Basically like they took a mugshot of her that day. This is clearly not how aging technology works. It normally gives more basic features based on the shape of a person's head, so there's a ballpark idea of what someone may look like. This, along with the other 2 things I mentioned, are not enough to take me out of the film personally, but I understand if someone doesn't care for the film based on some of these weird choices made by Wan. I personally find the attic scene and the photo aging scene more comedic than anything, but like I said before, I'm not sure if that's what James Wan was shooting for. I'm personally okay with suspending my belief for a horror film to some extent, as long as the enjoyment I get out of the film is as much as Malignant brings to the screen. Malignant isn't a film that is trying to communicate some larger message. It isn't even a film that makes sense throughout its entire runtime, but James Wan made one of those unrelenting movies that just rates super high on the fun scale and is an amazing love letter to horror cinema. It's definitely not a film everyone will enjoy, especially those who are used to the modern wave of horror thrillers. I think Malignant fits very nicely into James Wan's filmography and will carry a cult-like status into the future. It was a nice breath of fresh air into a genre, as so many larger budget entries are sequels, remakes, or just lacking a bit on that pure enjoyment factor. James Wan is a living legend of horror cinema, and I cannot wait to see what amazing ideas come out of his mind next. I want to thank you for checking out my review of Malignant. Let me know what you think about the movie in the comments below, and while you're down there, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It all goes in a long way in helping me out. Have a good one, everybody.